Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies. Hey initiates! Today, we continue our deep dive tour of one rabbit hole known as the Paul is dead theory. Did Paul McCartney die in a car crash in 1966? And was he replaced by session musician and producer William Shepard, as some have alleged? Let's see.
So, the Memoirs of Billy Shears, Billy's Back edition, chapter 1. And this is exactly how the book starts. Almost everything about me taking Paul's place was made possible because of a series of dreams that Paul had, showing his death and me replacing him, and by my dreams of Paul, showing me how. And I thought, well, we're off to a fucking great start. It's all about fucking dreams. Right. Anyway.
Wait, hold, what? Paul had dreams? Or he had dreams? And how does he know about Paul's dreams? Did he meet Paul before? Oh, I'm jumping way too far ahead.
It'll all become clear.
I have questions.
Yes, of course. Well, this is a book that in many ways will sort of raise more questions than it answers, if we're brutally honest, right? But we'll leave those surprises until they happen. So I want it told before I die so that you will know I knew. After discussing my undertakings in his name, Paul said, "You will be released on the 21st of February, 2014. I asked for a 9-year extension for more tours since I needed to see my Utah-based encoder one last time. A tour would include it. Until I am done, this book will be distributed on a level that will keep it down. We will keep it underground until I am." And you might notice that February 2014 has long since come and gone. So evidently, Billy Shepard decided to change his mind. So anyway, Billy, who is the protagonist of this book, says that the song Yesterday by the Beatles has been played more than any other song on the radio. And it's also apparently the most covered song of all time. And he also goes on to explain that the song came to the original Paul McCartney via a dream. And I thought, oh, for fuck's sake. And then I looked it up, right, okay, and it turns out that's actually true.
Really?
Sort of. Anyway, so the book continues. That sweet melody in its entirety sprang forth unbroken from one of Paul's dreams. He woke up with it at Jane Asher's house one morning in May 1965. Jane Asher was an actress, a British actress, and she was in a relationship with Paul McCartney for a long time. So these are from Beatles biographies. This is from Steve Turner's A Hard Day's Right. Upon waking, he hurried to the piano and played the tune to avoid forgetting it. And this is from the Beatles' Day to Day by Craig Cross. Initially, he was concerned, though, that he'd subconsciously plagiarized someone else's work. As he put it, for about a month, I went round to people in the music business and asked them whether they had ever heard it before. Eventually, it became like handing something into the police. I thought that if no one claimed it after a few weeks, then I could have it. And then the book, Billy's Back, goes on to say that initially, instead of Yesterday, Paul McCartney actually had the lyrics, the fill-in lyrics for the melody, Scrambled Eggs and Lovely Legs, and that he tinkered with this on the set of Help. And so, okay, fair enough. We're off to a fair start. This did actually come to Paul McCartney in a dream. But is the date that Billy's got in this book of 1965 correct? Because you'd expect him to know these things, wouldn't you? Being that, he replaced Paul McCartney. You see, from the book written by Cross, it says McCartney originally claimed that he had written Yesterday during the Beatles tour of France in 1964. So a year prior to the supposed dream, or to the supposed date that Billy puts forward. McCartney said that the breakthrough with the lyrics came to him during a trip to Portugal in May 1965. I remember mulling over the tune yesterday and suddenly getting these little one-word openings to the verse, and I started to develop the idea. Da da da, yesterday, suddenly, funnily, merrily, and yesterday. That's good. All my troubles seem so far away. It's easy to rhyme all those A's, say, nay, today, away, play, stay. There's lots of rhymes, and those fall in quite easily. So I gradually pieced it together from that journey. Suddenly, and be again. Another easy rhyme. E, me, tree, flea, we. And I had the basis of it. And that's from Barry Miles' book, Paul McCartney, Many Years From Now. So anyway, so initially I'm like, I'm not sure you got that date right, which made me think that maybe this book wasn't written by the man that replaced Paul McCartney, but never mind. So the book claims that Paul has been having nightmares, and the lyrics came from there. And one of these nightmares that Paul had involved observing the recording of the song When I'm 64, but it wasn't him that was playing. It looked like him, but it wasn't him. Someone had replaced him. A gentle voice behind him, unheard by others, said, Paul, this is the man who will take your place. And the dream panicked him, but it also gave him a face to seek out. And so Paul has a series of nightmares, some involving a girl standing in the rain, waiting for a car, one involving people not recognizing him or being unable to find him, and another where a girl is going through a jukebox looking for Paul McCartney songs, and he says that he can see them, but she can't see them. And so all these nightmares are culminating in Paul McCartney's head, and it's almost as if they're trying to give him a premonition or a message. And so Paul decides that he needs to speak to somebody that knows about this sort of stuff. And so on the set of Help, according to the book, he decides to speak to a man called Vernon E. Mosher. Do you know who Vernon E. Mosher is?
I have never heard of him.
Vernon E. Mosher was connected to Bobby Beausoleil and the Satanist Kenneth Anger. And if you want to know a bit more about Kenneth Anger, go and listen to our Illuminati music industry series. Essentially, Kenneth Anger was a filmmaker and ceremonial magician obsessed with Aleister Crowley that eventually did films that involved Led Zeppelin and Mick Jagger, and also Anton LaVey from the Church of Satan, and Bobby Beausoleil, who was connected to the Manson killings. Anyway, back to the book. Hardly a day ever passed without Paul discussing one of his horrific nightmares. Finally, Vernon E. Mosher, one of Kenneth Anger's Satanists, met the Beatles on the 11th of May, that's 1966, the last day of filming Help. In telling him of Paul's dreams, they asked him what it meant. It means that you are the one. Mosher asked how long it had been since the band had made their contract with Satan. Then he added all the numbers up to measure Paul's life, and he basically said that I would estimate that you have another 15 months to live. And so this is the thing. Paul McCartney's getting these dreams, and he decides to speak to this occultist and Satanist known as Vernon E. Mosher on the set of the film Help. And he tells him that, well, you know that you guys made a contract with Satan all those years ago. I'm afraid it's now time for one of you to pay the price, and that's going to be you, Paul. And all of these nightmares that you're having, they're sort of they're indications that, you know, Father Time's coming for your soul.
They are the hounds of hell coming for you.
Yes, exactly. Like that bit in Ghost. It's going to be fucking horrible. So, but apparently, despite being one of the world's most successful performers, Paul McCartney still actually, today, still suffers from reoccurring nightmares. He has this reoccurring nightmare where basically he's trying to play in a stadium, either with the Beatles or with the band, and the audience start to boo him and walk away. And so he starts whipping out his big hits like Hey Jude or Long Tall Sally, but none of the audience are responding to him. And this apparently typically ends with him waking up in a cold sweat. In reality, McCartney says that these dreams basically remind him of his humanity, noting that even though he's considered a legend, he's a real person, and things go wrong, basically. So anyway, Vernon E. Mosher is the person that told Paul McCartney this. And in the theory, he's supposed to be a link to Kenneth Anger. And he's connected to the filmmaker Kenneth Anger, essentially through the theft and destruction of Anger's legendary unfinished film, Lucifer Rising. Now, if people are not familiar with this, in the 60s, Anger was trying to make a film called Lucifer Rising, and Bobby Beausoleil, later connected to the Manson killings, was supposed to play Lucifer. And they were also probably embroiled in a sexual relationship. Bobby Beausoleil got sick of this and just decided to leave. And at this point, Kenneth Anger decided, or told everybody, that all the footage had been stolen by Bobby Beausoleil, and that in order to get revenge on him, he was going to turn him into a toad, which didn't actually happen. But, he was a busy man. Eventually, he did make a version of Lucifer. He then took the bits of footage that he had and made a film called Invocation of My Demon Brother with Mick Jagger. And Mick Jagger did the soundtrack. And he would later go on to make Lucifer Rising, although he would fall out with Led Zeppelin and put a curse on them because Jimmy Page was supposed to do the soundtrack. And in the end, the person who ended up doing the soundtrack was Bobby Beausoleil. So, anywho. So, in the late 1960s, Bobby Beausoleil, a musician and associate of both Anger and the Manson family, supposedly stole a significant portion of the original Lucifer Rising footage from Anger's home. Vernon Mosher, was an acquaintance of both Anger and Beausoleil, and according to various accounts, according to Anger, Beausoleil fled with the footage and gave it to Mosher before Mosher then disposed of it. But this is probably not true. Anger claimed that Mosher then subsequently destroyed the films, or at least a huge part of it, as part of a ritualistic sacrifice. And Anger often claimed that he basically either burned or buried the footage in Death Valley. But basically, Beausoleil denied this. He says, this never happened. He didn't steal it because he didn't do it. He didn't do it because he'd spent all his money that he was supposed to make the film on drugs. And so he decided to tell people that the film had been stolen in order to appease his creditors. So anyway, did Vernon E. Mosher meet them on the set of Help? Because this is a very important part of the thing. Well, apparently the filming of Help was pretty high profile. It was a tightly scheduled professional production directed by Richard Lester. The cast and crew lists for the movie are basically available and they're well documented. Can you believe that neither Vernon E. Mosher or Kenneth Anger appear on the records? So they never met. They were never on the set. Do you want to know how I know that Vernon E. Mosher was not the conduit between Kenneth Anger and the Beatles, other than the fact that there's no record of them being on the set of Help? Because, maybe he was there secretly. Maybe he had that bit expunged. Do you want to know how I know this is definitely not true?
Absolutely.
Well, Vernon E. Mosher didn't meet Kenneth Anger until 1968. And
there we go.
And Help was made in the mid-60s. He didn't know Anger in 1965, so he couldn't have been the conduit that this book claims.
I thought you were going to say that, he was in prison at the time or something like that, yeah.
Nobody knows where he was because he's not important. He's just a bloke. Like, he's just this guy that vaguely knew like a criminal and a filmmaker. That's it. Silly, really. But anyway, the book continues. Mosher's predicted timing was too soon by 1 month. The last several months of Paul's life reflected his tormenting dreams. His music had a new seriousness in it from January 1965 until he died in September 1966. So Yesterday was recorded on the same day as the B-side, I'm Down. And the book suggests that the lyrics to I'm Down were essentially Paul McCartney and his fear of his impending death. And the encoding, because remember the encoding, I soon forget it because you'll realize it's meaningless. The encoding says, I'm Fab here. He meets a girl, all the same home entering my death world, which is, incoherent at best, really. The book then says, and I quote, really, he feared falling as the Eggman, Humpty Dumpty, saying goo goo bajoob, and then entering eternity, joining all the fallen.
What?
It's haunting, isn't it? Really? He's scared of his impending death, and he's saying that really he feared falling as the Eggman, Humpty Dumpty, saying goo goo gajoob, and then entering eternity, joining all the fallen. So what he's trying to suggest is that basically, like, I don't know what he's trying to sort of tie in, like, lyrics from I Am the Walrus to basically Humpty Dumpty falls down and supposedly is smashed. He's made of eggs. He is the Eggman. That's supposedly about him dying, although that was written and recorded long after he died. But the book's full of shit like this. Anyway, so Billy continues, ever since Paul died, I have dreamed of him more often than he had of me. My dreams made us all interested in spiritual things. So Billy says in the book that he's been to Liverpool, obviously since he's become Paul McCartney, and it looks exactly like it did in his dreams. But his dreams aren't his dreams. He's since discovered that he was having Paul McCartney's dreams. And was sort of kind of like mind melting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the opening sentence makes sense. All right.
Yeah. But this is the thing. Like, and he's even
I say it makes sense.
Yeah. Kind of hangs together loosely. But he's even been spoken to Paul's or the late Paul's brother, Mike, and he's filled him in on all these details. And he says that there's all these weird connections and sort of like. It was weird. Like they had this, like, that they were sort of telepathically in communication right from 1965 and continuing now, but we'll get into that later. It also goes to say that although Billy strongly disavows drugs, when he joined the Beatles, they were at the height of their drug revolution. And the book says, back then, we thought LSD was rather liberating. I would never touch the stuff now, though. Now I know too much about it to allow my mind, body, or soul to be destroyed by it. I was introduced to LSD by John and George in 1966. They had each been turned onto the drug way back in early 1965 in the home of their dentist, along with Sin and Patty. John and George had a cup of coffee without being told it was laced with it. I first tried acid I first tried it with him after overdubbing Strawberry Fields on the 15th of December. The day that Walt Disney died. And so obviously that's a famous story that John and George were dosed with their girlfriends by a dentist friend of them. And that was the first time that they had LSD. And what he's saying is that as Paul McCartney, he tried it after overdubbing Strawberry Fields. And this is the day that Walt Disney died. But this does not appear to be correct because Paul McCartney's first LSD trip, accounts vary slightly on the exact dates. Basically, some say it's December the 13th, 1965, at the home of his friend Tara Brown, who was apparently the heir to the Guinness fortune. And this was following the Beatles' final UK tour date. So, they were doing it just like to kick back. Other records, including his authorized biography, many years from now, suggest it's January 1966, shortly before recording sessions for the album Revolver. Maybe they're not. Maybe I've misunderstood that. Maybe he's talking about his first trip with John Lennon. Well, that's wrong too, because apparently his first trip that Paul McCartney took with John Lennon was on the 21st of March, 1967, during a recording session for Getting Better. I'm getting better all the time. Lennon took it thinking it was Speed. And McCartney basically when, oh shit, I can't have you tripping on your own, so I'll take some too, otherwise you'll freak the fuck out.
No way.
Yeah. So, but again, these are the sort of details that you would expect them to get right, but they don't. But hey ho, you know, all those little details, the things that only someone that was there would know. But anyway, so Billy goes on in the book. But when I was for it, I actively promoted LSD. On the board of directors, along with John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, Andrew Oldham, the Stones manager, and Terry Melcher, Doris Day's son, a record producer, I networked with MKUltra, a joint CIA British intelligence task force, to provide free distribution during the first annual Monterey International Pop Festival. It was attended by over 100,000 observers who were invited to participate with free hallucinogens. The government had agreed that they would not enforce any drug laws there, and it was all with complete US-UK government facilitation. Right. Now, this got right on my tits because this is stuff that I actually know about. Okay. What he's done there...
I was waiting for this.
Well, what he's done there is he's taken the credit for somebody called Owsley Stanley, who was also sometimes known as the Bear. He very famously freely distributed loads and loads of acid at the Monterey International Pop Festival. His real name was Augustus Owsley Stanley III, and he was also he provided LSD for like Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters and also for the band The Grateful Dead. So Stanley produced a special batch of really, really potent LSD for the event, and it was called Monterey Purple. You know the song, Jimi Hendrix song, Purple Haze? It's about Monterey Purple.
Yep.
Yeah. So he's estimated
not about weed then.
No, it's about LSD. So he's estimated to have made about 100,000 doses of this, and he basically gave it out for free. He gave the acid to performers like Jimi Hendrix, Pete Townsend, and Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, and also to a bugger ton of the people who worked there. Basically, everybody got a free hit of this massively strong acid there. So apparently Pete Townsend of the band The Who had a very negative effect. He had a bad trip after taking it at Monterey, and reportedly swore off LSD for nearly 2 decades afterwards. Although rumors that it was that LSD that made him go down that very dark path later in life can't really be substantiated. Now, some say that Owsley Stanley was CIA, and some say that he was unwittingly CIA. Others say that he was actually really anti-government, and that basically the proof of this is that when he was actually caught with all his acid, he did 3 years in prison. And this is a strange one, because like at the time the CIA were experimenting with LSD as part of MKUltra, and they were trying to get it as like a truth serum. They wanted to see if it would basically in interrogations make somebody not be able to lie. They also used it as a weapon, as a non-lethal weapon. There was ideas to do things like dose Fidel Castro so that he acted mad, and maybe it would even send him mad. And they did experiment by dosing members of the public. Whether the involvement of people like Owsley Stanley and Timothy Leary and other people like that is a bit of a sketchy area, because some of them certainly seem to, like, for example, Timothy Leary got money through the sort of the Mellon banking family, which have traditionally sort of been connected to the aristocracy of America, and there is a kind of tie over between certain institutions, say like Yale and the CIA. It depends who you speak to as to how close who was pulling whose strings, essentially. And it's probably something that we should go back and look at with fresh, non-conspiratorial eyes to see exactly how involved certain people were. But there's elements of truth to this, essentially. But he hasn't described MKUltra correctly. It wasn't a task force. MKUltra was a code name for a whole series of different experiments and projects that loosely involved mind control, and there was about 150 that we know of, and they run the gamut from drugging people to influence campaigns, and right the way up to essentially, according to the declassified documents, attempting to mind control a human being to get them to the point where they would either kill themselves or commit murder against their will. And there was a whole series of experiments involving hypnotism, drugs, and various machinery that was involved in this. But this is what pissed me off, is because like they clearly don't actually know what they're talking about in this book. They don't understand what MK Ultra is. They don't know who Owsley Stanley is. They don't even mention fucking Owsley Stanley. You know why they don't mention him? Because they don't know the subject. Like, I read that, I was like, yeah, that's Owsley Stanley. You're talking about Owsley Stanley, right? Okay. Like, they make no mention of it. The book goes on. Having MK Ultra's objective of making San Francisco a youth-centered gathering place for drug experimentation made it easy to get their cooperation in freely supplying the massive distribution for the rock show in Monterey, just 2 hours away. The key people connecting John Phillips with the drug distribution through government agencies were Ken Kesey, Timothy Leary, and others. Ken Kesey got his fucking LSD from Owsley Stanley. You don't know what you're talking about, right? So, anyway. So, you know how Owsley Stanley used to... he used to carry like the majority of his stash around in a suitcase and then hide the rest of it in a locker, and then ship it via Greyhound bus. Basically, stick it on a Greyhound and then pick it up down the road. It was crazy. Basically, you had this system called the 30-day rule, and basically luggage could be held at a bus station for 30 days, and he would pick up the trunk, take only the doses that he currently needed, and then immediately ship it to another city for a 30-day stay, ensuring that the bulk of his supply was never in his home or his lab, but it was available to him should he want it. For immediate personal use and to dose others, he was known to carry a small glass bottle, often described as an eyedropper bottle, that had his incredibly pure LSD that he essentially made himself. At the time of his major arrest in December 1967, a lab in California, he had on him 67.5 grams of absolutely pure LSD, which was enough to make 700,000 doses. Yeah. But he went to prison for it.
Hey, thanks for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. Join us next week for the next installment of our Paul is Dead deep dive series. If you'd like to skip ahead and hear all 14 episodes of the series right now, please consider joining us at www.patreon.com/somedarecallitconspiracy, where you can also listen to over 20 unreleased episodes of our now Patreon exclusive series, The World According to Some, aka Twats. Until next time.